So let's bring in my guest right now, as he is here on a Monday every week, Sky's political contributor, Chris Uhlmann. Chris, we'll start with that poll. I just went through it at the top of the show. This is in the 9 papers, the Resolve poll. Labor behind One Nation on primary, and the Prime Minister now behind Pauline Hanson as preferred PM, and it's by a decent margin too. So Labor's spin here that this momentum for One Nation's not real, it's dissipating, it's a grievance vote. We've had, a couple of months of this trend now. It's not going anywhere other than up.
Well, Peter, in our lifetime, we've never seen anything like it, right? So when you look at third parties in Australia, usually they are a party that garners some percentage of the vote. The DLP managed to keep the Labor Party out of office or help keep them out for 23 years. But by taking a slither of their vote, we've seen the Democrats, we've seen the Greens, usually a political party like One Nation polls in, somewhere around about 10% or under. This is completely new for us. We've never seen anything like this before, and the idea that One Nation is essentially the de facto opposition at the moment, let's face it, that's the way Pauline Hanson is being treated. She's getting more coverage now than Angus Taylor is. He's struggling for oxygen. And the Prime Minister is essentially treating One Nation as the de facto opposition because that seems to be the thing he's thinking about most. That we are now in uncharted waters, and obviously it's a threat to the Labor Party in some of its seats, but it's an existential threat to the Liberal Party. The Liberal Party faces the very real possibility that it will be consigned to the history books.
Yeah, it's less now almost, Chris, isn't it, between left and right, to where you are in the food chain in terms of your power, your income, the ability you have to voice your concerns and get heard. It feels like if you're an elite, if you're signing up to the things that mainstream media is talking about, if you're doing the head nod to the 3 flags, you love your welcomes to country, you've got money in your pocket, you're a little bit insulated from things like immigration, let's say, you're in one camp. Whether you're on the right, like the Teal types, or whether you're on the left, like the Labor Green inner city left. And if you're on the other side, whether you're in the regions, whether you're in the outer suburbs, whether you're the old Labor working class, those left-right paradigms don't work anymore. It goes to issues of power and income that's really dividing the two camps.
Yeah, and I think we can try and find lots of different ways of looking at it, but I'd put it this way, the insiders and the outsiders. It's those people who believe that they are being looked after by this government, and those that think that they aren't, and they aren't being looked after by both major parties. And that's the rage. That's where the rage comes from. They believe that the system as it's constructed essentially works against them, and they measure that by the fact that their lives are becoming harder. It's becoming more and more difficult for them to live the kinds of lives that they want to live and to believe the promise of Australia, which is that your children will be better off than you are. And when you get to the stage where you think you've been betrayed, essentially, by both major parties, you start looking for alternatives. And it just so happens that there is one now on offer where people think, look, whatever you think of Pauline Hanson, people think they have a clear idea of what she stands for. Now, you and I both know that's actually pretty badly defined. We do need to see a whole lot more from One Nation before we would consider them to be a party of government, and that means putting some answers to the questions which they so rightly raise. But at the moment, I think that a lot of people are prepared just to burn the show down and see what happens next.
Yeah. I also think, after years and years of Polly's speak, and I want to say it's probably 20 years of Polly's speak, they love her authenticity. They love that, she isn't scripted. She sort of says what they're thinking, that perhaps they can't even say in their own home anymore. If their mates are around for a barbecue, they think twice about raising their real views or how they feel about some of these issues. She doesn't. She's out there. We saw her take on that journalist the other day who had a crack at her flying business class, and she ripped one back into the journalist. And even in socialist Victoria, she's on a 29% polling primary today, and Labor's on 24%. And yes, this is with a federal overlay, but who would have thought that One Nation would be ahead in the polls in this state, which faces, of course, a big election in November?
Yeah, that will be one of the real tests, won't it? And if all that happens is that the right-hand side of politics essentially is divided and Labor is re-elected, then I don't think that's going to suit anyone in Victoria, because I think that the people of Victoria really would like an alternative. And the problem is that for way too long, the coalition offered them none, except constant distractions and division. And people want one of two things out of a political party, either competence or conviction, and they got neither of those things out of the coalition, so they went looking elsewhere. And even if they don't see competence in One Nation, they see a sense of conviction, an enduring sense of conviction and resilience, and that's what they're responding to as they go about the business of taking a hammer to the political system as usual. I think it's way bigger than just the political class, by the way, too. I think there's an entire class of people that a lot of people in Australia feel have nothing in common with them at all. So you can take it from the corporate sector of Australia, which is completely buried in its own sense of entitlement. The fact that the financial crisis, out of that, there should have been some punishment meted out. Nothing ever happened to them. The institutional class, that includes the bureaucrats and the courts, by the way, that people feel less and less connected to a system that has anything to do with what matters to them.
Well, add in schools, add in universities. I think it's the whole box and dice. Even when they pay so much in their taxes, but they've got to pay for their roads, I think right across the board Australians have had enough. You mentioned obviously there's been collateral damage, I guess, over the last few years on both sides, particularly obviously the Conservative side. We saw on the weekend the announced resignation of Senator Jonathan Duniam. Now, I've known him for 25, almost 30 years, a long-time staffer, obviously then into the parliament as a senator, and I think he's been one of the most effective they've had on the front bench. He's the Shadow Home Affairs Minister. He won't recontest the Senate seat, and nor will he stay on beyond the end of the year. And I think this is tough for Angus Taylor because I think he's one of the best he has.
Yeah, what does it say, though, by Peter? I can't claim to know the man well, but he clearly is one of the brighter lights in the Liberal Party. And when he says in the age, he's in his 40s, right? When he says he's exhausted by the political process, but particularly the political process inside his own party. Well, when your best and brightest are simply being worn out by the internal politics of their own party, what does he tell you about that party? And the people I'd really start to worry about now is, what are we thinking about an Andrew Hastie, who is a likely future leader? Surely as a young man, he must be looking around and thinking, really, I'm on a hiding to nothing here. I'll be fighting for my own seat. I've got a young family. I've got a troop across the country. For what? My fear is that the Liberal Party is already gutted, that they don't have the personnel anymore to mount the kind of comeback they need. And if they're losing people like this, it looks like people are abandoning ship well before the next election, which means they have no confidence in the capacity of the Liberal Party to revive. That is a terrible sentiment.
I think it's politics across the board, Chris, if I'm really honest. I think it's a very different place than it was when I first went in as a staffer in '98, and when I left in 2015, obviously under different circumstances than Jonathan Duniam. But it is so much faster. I think 24-hour news cycles. I think particularly social media. I think all the internal factionalism that was not there when I first arrived in the way it was when I left politics. I think all of that takes a toll, and he's had 25 years of it because being a senior staffer, you're running at that same sort of pace. And if you've got young kids, you're right, you think another maybe 3 years of opposition, for what? For what? I can fight and fight and fight, but there's a point you'll pass where you can't go off back outside of politics and start another career. And I think that's the tipping point for Jono.
Yeah, the thing with public life nowadays is there is no compromise in it.
Quick favour, if you are the kind of person who loves Australia and wants to be up to date on what is really going on in our country's politics, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. It keeps this channel going. Over 90% of viewers have not subscribed yet, and it would mean the world to us if you did. Thank you. Now, back to the show. For the first time in Australian history, a third party is not just crashing the two-party system, it is standing on top of it. Pauline Hanson is now ahead of Anthony Albanese as preferred Prime Minister, and One Nation is beating Labor on the primary vote. G'day, and welcome to the poll result Canberra has spent a week pretending did not happen. Labor's response was almost comedic. They called it a pity vote, a grievance vote, a temporary tantrum, which is a strange way to describe a number that puts their Prime Minister behind a woman they have spent 30 years telling us was finished. Here is the thing that commentators keep missing. This is not a left versus right story anymore. That old spectrum is dead. The new battle is insiders versus outsiders. On one side, the inner-city professionals and teal voters who feel heard, secure and affirmed. On the other, regional and outer-suburban Australia, squeezed by the cost of living, ignored by both major parties and sick to death of being talked down to.
And before we go further, do not forget to like and subscribe. It is how more Australians find this channel, and this story is not going away. Now, why is Hanson winning? It is not the policy depth, because there is not much of it. It is the one thing no strategist can manufacture: conviction. Voters will forgive a thin policy booklet if they believe you actually mean what you say. Hanson sounds like the barbecue talk nobody else has the nerve to repeat on camera. That is the entire product. Authenticity delivered unfiltered. And after a decade of polished spin, that is landing like a hammer. The Liberal Party is the real casualty here. Senior figures are resigning, and the talent is walking away because factionalism has hollowed the place out. When your best and brightest would rather quit than stay, you are not a party anymore, you're a waiting room for the history books. Labor is not safe either. In Victoria, One Nation is polling 29% against Labor's 24%. Let that sit for a second. The governing party losing its own state to a party running on 2 staffers and a barbecue table. And this frustration runs far deeper than politics. It's the corporations, the bureaucrats, the universities, an entire institutional class Australians believe stopped listening years ago. People are paying more in tax and seeing less in return. That is not a grievance, that is a receipt. The real test comes at the November Victorian state election. Either One Nation fragments the right and hands Labor the win, or we're watching the start of something none of the major parties know how to stop. That's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you